The town of Crestwood often spoke of them in reverent tones. Lila and Adrian Montgomery were the couple everyone envied. Elegant, gracious, impossibly in sync. At dinners, they seemed to read each other's minds. At church, they were the first to volunteer, hands interlocked like they had never once argued. Photographs framed on their mantel told the same story. Vacations by the sea, laughter in candlelit restaurants, perfectly posed moments of harmony. But pictures have always lied. Behind the heavy oak door of their pristine suburban home, silence often lingered longer than it should. Lila noticed the silence most in the evenings, when Adrian returned late and exhausted, his tie loosened, his smile mechanical. He asked about her day, but never listened long enough for her answer to matter. She cooked his favorite meals, yet his plate often went half untouched, as if his appetite belonged somewhere else. Neighbors adored them. "The Montgomerys," they whispered, "are the definition of a perfect marriage." They saw only the surface, Adrian's charm, Lila's poise, never the fleeting glance of irritation, never the too long pause before goodnight kisses, never the restless nights when Adrian lay awake staring at the ceiling. Still, Lila clung to the illusion. At a weekend gathering, laughter filled the Montgomerys' backyard. Friends toasted to forever love as fairy lights twinkled above. Adrian's arm rested gently on Lila's shoulder, and she leaned into him for the audience, her lips grazing his cheek. To the crowd, it looked tender. To Lila, it felt rehearsed, as though both of them were playing parts written years ago, afraid to abandon the script. "Adrian, darling," she whispered between smiles, "don't forget to thank Tom for the wine." "Of course," he replied smoothly, moving across the lawn with practiced ease. Lila's eyes followed him, not with admiration, but with a quiet ache. She could sense the distance growing, a shadow between them that no one else could see. For every toast to their happiness, a cold thought clawed at the back of her mind. How long until the mask slips? Later that night, after the guests had gone and the glasses were stacked by the sink, the house sank into its usual hush. Adrian disappeared into his study, door closed, phone in hand. Lila stood in the kitchen, staring at the faint lipstick stain on his shirt collar, not hers. She ran a finger over it, her chest tightening, yet when he emerged minutes later, she forced her lips into a smile. "Long day?" she asked softly. "Always," he muttered, placing a kiss on her forehead, before retreating upstairs. The kiss felt like an afterthought. Lila lingered in the kitchen long after the lights were out, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the room. She wanted to believe she was imagining it. The late arrivals, the distracted eyes, the unfamiliar perfume that sometimes clung to his jacket. But the truth pressed harder each night, impossible to ignore. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat at the table alone, the lipstick stain burning in her mind. From the outside, they would always be the perfect couple. Inside, though, Lila knew they were unraveling thread by thread. As midnight approached, she finally climbed the stairs. Adrian was already asleep, or pretending to be. His back faced her, his breathing steady, deliberate. She slipped beneath the covers, staring into the dark. Her hand reached for his, hesitated, then withdrew. The silence between them was louder than any argument. And somewhere deep inside, Lila realized this was only the beginning. A whisper of cracks that would soon shatter the illusion everyone believed. The silence of their bedroom had become a third presence in their marriage. Heavy, watchful, unrelenting. Lila would lie awake long after Adrian drifted into his carefully timed sleep, her mind looping back to the lipstick stain, the coldness in his touch, the way his phone seemed to buzz with life only when she wasn't looking. Days passed in a blur of routine, but the whispers in her head grew louder. She began noticing details that once escaped her. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirt, the trace of expensive cologne that wasn't his, and the way his schedule no longer matched the excuses he offered. On Tuesday evening, when Adrian claimed a late meeting at the firm, Lila decided not to drown her doubts in wine. Instead, she waited. Hours ticked by. shadows shifting across the living room walls until the sound of his car finally echoed in the driveway. He stepped inside near midnight, his tie loose, his smile strained. "You're still up?" His tone was casual, but his eyes flickered with surprise. "I couldn't sleep," Lila said, studying him. "How was the meeting?" "Long. Boring. You know how it is." He shrugged, moving past her toward the kitchen, as though the conversation had ended before it began. But Lila's gaze caught on the folded slip of paper that peeked from his pocket. When he left the room, she retrieved it from the counter where he'd carelessly dropped it, a receipt. 2 glasses of wine, an expensive dinner for 2. The timestamp mocked her, 10:37 p.m. When Adrian returned, she held the paper loosely in her hand. "Boring meeting?" she asked, her voice carefully measured. His eyes darted to the receipt, then back to her. For a fleeting second, something raw flickered across his face. Irritation, maybe fear, but it vanished behind a mask of calm. "It was business, Lila. You don't understand the way these dinners work." "Business," she repeated, her fingers trembling. "Is that what they call it now?" He exhaled sharply, jaw tightening. "Don't start. You're imagining things again." Again. The word stung. It wasn't the first time he had brushed away her concerns, turning suspicion into paranoia. She wondered how long he had been perfecting this tactic, denying just enough to make her question her sanity. The next night, his phone rang while he showered. The screen lit up with a name she didn't recognize. Clara. Lila's chest constricted. She almost answered, but fear held her hand back. Instead, she memorized the number before the call faded. At dinner, she tried again. "Who's Clara?" she asked, watching his fork freeze midair. He forced a chuckle. "A client. Why?" "She calls you after midnight?" His eyes hardened, the warmth stripped away. "Lila, you're reading into things. Do you want to spend our lives doubting each other? Or do you want to trust me?" Trust. The word sounded hollow now, like an echo in an empty room. She lowered her gaze, swallowing the storm inside her. But the whispers would not quiet. That weekend, while folding Adrian's laundry, she found another trace, a faint perfume woven into his shirt, floral and unfamiliar. The discovery sent a chill through her veins. He had been close to someone, close enough for her scent to linger. When Adrian returned home late once more, she confronted him, voice trembling. "Where were you tonight? Don't lie to me." His expression darkened. "Why do you always assume the worst? Because the truth is never in your eyes anymore." For a long moment, neither spoke. The distance between them was no longer just emotional. It was palpable, stretching across the room like a chasm neither dared to cross. That night, as Adrian slept with his back turned, Lila lay wide awake, clutching the sheets in her fists. She could hear the faint hum of his phone vibrating on the nightstand, its light flashing in the darkness like a silent confession. The whispers in her head were no longer just suspicions. They were warnings. And soon, they would lead her to a discovery that would turn suspicion into undeniable truth. The whispers had become relentless, clawing at Lila's thoughts until she could no longer distinguish suspicion from reality. Adrian's late nights, the perfume, the phone calls, each detail carved deeper into her certainty that something was terribly wrong. One Saturday afternoon, she decided to take his car for groceries. It was a small rebellion, one Adrian never encouraged. He claimed she was safer in her own. Sliding into the driver's seat, her hand brushed against something soft, a scarf, pale lavender silk, folded carelessly and tucked between the seat and console. Lila froze. She didn't own anything like it. She lifted it slowly, the faint scent of jasmine rising to meet her, delicate yet damning. The scarf trembled in her hands as if it carried the weight of an unspoken truth. She pressed it to her chest, heart pounding, before shoving it back into place just as Adrian appeared on the porch. "Need help with the bags?" he called, his smile too easy. She forced herself to smile back. "No, I've got it." Her voice cracked just enough for her to notice, though Adrian seemed oblivious. Yet as she drove away, the scarf burned in her mind, a shadow she could no longer ignore. That night, when Adrian's phone buzzed against the nightstand, she didn't hesitate. She snatched it up, her breath quickening as the screen lit with a single message. "Miss you already. Tonight was perfect." Cher's fingers tightened around the device. She wanted to scream, to wake him and demand the truth, but fear rooted her to the spot. What if he lied again? What if he turned it back on her the way he always did? Instead, she slipped the phone back into place and lay beside him, her eyes burning in the darkness. Every breath he took felt like a betrayal. Every moment of his sleep a performance of innocence. The next morning, over coffee, she tried to test him. "Adrian, who's Clara?" He didn't flinch, he didn't blink. "I told you, a client." "You're sure?" she pressed. "Because clients don't usually send messages like—" She stopped herself before revealing too much. Adrian's jaw tightened. "You're digging for something that isn't there. Do you want to ruin us, Lila? Is that what you want?" His words struck like a blade, not just denial, but accusation. He had turned suspicion into her crime. Lila lowered her eyes, but inside, anger and fear tangled into something darker. She no longer trusted his explanations. She barely trusted herself. The scarf, the perfume, the message, they circled her, thoughts like vultures. She began to notice his patterns more carefully, the way he lingered in the driveway before entering the house, the way his phone never left his pocket, the way he spoke her name only when others were listening. By Wednesday, she could no longer resist. She slipped into his study while he showered, searching for scraps of evidence among his neatly stacked papers. At first, she found nothing, until a business card slipped from a folder. Clara Whitmore, a name embossed in silver, with a number. She recognized immediately. Her breath caught. It was the same number she had memorized from his midnight calls. She shoved the card back, heart racing as Adrian's footsteps creaked upstairs. But the damage was done. She had her answer, and it filled her with both dread and certainty. That evening, Adrian kissed her cheek as he left for another late dinner. She stood at the window, watching his taillights fade into the distance, her reflection staring back at her from the glass, pale, hollow, trembling. She whispered to herself, as if saying it aloud could make it real. "He's lying. He's lying to me." The scarf remained hidden in his car. The card remained in his drawer. But their presence haunted her every breath, and as the clock struck midnight once again, Lila realized the stranger's shadow was no longer outside her marriage. It was inside her home, inside her bed, inside her heart. The house felt colder that evening, though no window was open. Lila sat rigid at the dining table, her untouched meal congealing on the plate. Adrian was late again, another meeting, another excuse. The silence pressed against her chest until headlights sliced across the curtains. Moments later, Adrian walked in, loosening his tie, his face lined with weariness that seemed practiced. "You're still up?" he asked, dropping his keys onto the counter with a casual clink. Lila's eyes never left him. "Where were you?" He glanced at her, then away, as though the question barely merited attention. "I told you, work dinner." "Work dinners don't smell like jasmine," she snapped, rising to her feet. Her voice cracked under the weight of days, weeks, months of suspicion. Adrian froze. Slowly, his eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about now?" Her hands trembled as she gripped the back of the chair. "I found a scarf in your car, lavender, silk. Does Clara wear jasmine perfume too? Or was that someone else?" For a fleeting second, his expression faltered. Just long, enough to confirm what she already knew. But then, like clockwork, the mask slid back into place. He exhaled through his nose, a short laugh escaping his lips. "You've lost it, Lila. Do you hear yourself? You're turning into some paranoid housewife." Her heart lurched at the cruelty in his tone. "Don't you dare make me feel crazy. I saw the receipt, I read the message. Don't lie to me anymore." Adrian's hand slammed against the table, rattling the dishes. "Enough. You're obsessed with fantasies. Do you want to destroy this marriage over nothing?" "Nothing," she echoed, her voice breaking. Tears brimmed at the edges of her eyes. "I gave you everything, Adrian. My love, My trust. And you throw it away for a woman whose name you can't even hide. His jaw clenched, the muscles in his face tightening as though her words had struck deeper than he wanted to admit. You think you know me? He hissed. You don't know a damn thing about what I need. The confession, if it was one, sliced through her. She staggered back, clutching her chest as though the pain were physical. Then say it, she whispered. Say you don't love me anymore. The room hung heavy with silence. Adrian's lips parted, but no words came. He stared at her, his face unreadable, caught between fury and something softer, something almost resembling regret. But he didn't speak. He couldn't. The silence was worse than any answer. Lila's breath shuddered. I hate you for making. I doubt myself, for making me feel small, for pretending this is all in my head when you know it isn't. Her words echoed against the walls, sharp as glass. Adrian turned away, dragging a hand over his face. You're impossible, he muttered. I can't talk to you when you're like this. He started toward the stairs, but Lila's voice stopped him cold. If you walk away now, Adrian, don't come back. He froze at the bottom step. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn. For a moment it seemed he might answer. An apology, a confession, anything. But then he continued upward, each footstep like a nail driven deeper into their marriage. Lila stood trembling, her fists clenched, her chest heaving with rage and grief. The illusion of the perfect couple had shattered, their polished veneer replaced by venom and silence. The words they had hurled could never be taken back. They lingered like ghosts in the air. She sank into the chair, pressing her palms to her face, sobs breaking through despite her efforts to contain them. She felt both emptied and overflowing, drained of love, filled with despair. Upstairs, Adrian closed the bedroom door. The click echoed like a verdict. For the rest of the night, Lila remained downstairs, staring at the empty wine glass on the table, the remnants of the life they had once pretended to have. She knew something inside their marriage had cracked, beyond repair, and as the clock struck midnight, the house no longer felt like home. It felt like a battlefield waiting for blood. The tension from that night never dissolved. Days passed, but the silence between Lila and Adrian stretched into something unbearable, a silence that felt sharp, like broken glass under bare feet. They spoke little, their words clipped, their gazes cold. Then came the storm. The wind howled against the windows, rain slashing in furious sheets. Lightning lit the sky in fractured bursts, followed by thunder that shook the walls. Lila stood in the kitchen, staring at the storm while clutching a glass of wine she hadn't touched. Upstairs, Adrian paced the hall, his footsteps a restless rhythm echoing above her. When he finally descended the stairs, his expression was shadowed. We can't keep doing this, he said flatly. Lila's grip tightened on the glass. Then, tell me the truth and the lies, Adrian, just once. He shook his head, his jaw set. You'll twist whatever I say, you always do. The word stung. I twist? Her voice rose above the thunder outside. I saw the messages. I found her scarf. Stop treating me like I'm blind. Adrian slammed his hand onto the counter, the glass rattling beneath her fingers. Enough, Lila! His shout cut through the storm, sharp and violent. The wine glass slipped from her trembling hand, shattering on the floor. The red liquid spread like a stain across the tiles, seeping into the cracks. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Then came the scream. It tore from Lila's throat, raw and piercing, carrying through the storm into the night. Neighbors later swore they heard it, followed by the sound of glass breaking. Louder, harsher, not the delicate fracture of a wine glass, but something heavier. By the time flashing lights cut through the rain, the Montgomery house was silent. Again. 2 officers entered through the unlocked front door. The first thing they noticed was the smell. Sharp, metallic, unmistakable. Blood. It smeared across the floor in streaks, droplets trailing toward the kitchen island. And there was Lila. She stood trembling, her nightgown damp with storm water and sweat, her hands smeared in red, Her eyes were wide, unfocused, like she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. "Ma'am," one officer said cautiously, "are you hurt?" Lila shook her head, her lips trembling. I don't know." The second officer scanned the room. "Where's your husband?" Her gaze darted to the stairs, then to the back door left ajar, wind whipping the curtains into the room. Her voice broke as she whispered, "He's gone." The officers exchanged a look. Blood pooled beneath her feet, but no body lay in sight. They followed the trail, smudges on the counter, droplets leading toward the open door, footprints, washed thin by the rain outside. "Dispatch, we've got signs of a violent incident. Possible missing person," one officer spoke into his radio. Neighbors gathered outside, umbrellas shielding them from the downpour. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A scream, shattered glass, blood. The Montgomerys, the perfect couple, had finally slipped from their pedestal. Inside, Lila sank into a chair, her chest heaving. "He was angry," she murmured more to herself than to the officers. "I didn't mean to." Her words trailed off into silence. "Didn't mean to what, ma'am?" Her eyes flicked toward them, glossy with tears. But instead of answering, she buried her face in her stained hands. The officers secured the scene, marking every streak of red, every shard of glass. But the central question lingered heavy in the storm-filled air. Where was Adrian Montgomery? By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the house in eerie quiet. The blood still glistened on the floor, a reminder that something violent had erupted between the couple once deemed perfect. And as Lila was escorted into the back of a patrol car, wrapped in a blanket, the neighbors could only watch in stunned silence. The woman they once envied now looked broken, fragile, yet shrouded in mystery. Adrian was gone. Lila was covered in blood. And no one could yet say which of them was the true victim. The interrogation room smelled faintly of coffee and bleach, a sterile chamber where truth and lies often shared the same chair. Lila sat hunched forward, a blanket draped over her shoulders, her damp hair clinging to her face. Her hands still bore faint smears of blood, though she had washed them repeatedly. Detective Harris, a man with sharp eyes and a heavier silence than most, slid a recorder across the table. "Mrs. Montgomery, we need your account of what happened." "Last night," Lila's voice was barely above a whisper. "He came at me. Adrian, he was angry. He shouted, threw a glass. I was scared." "Scared of what?" Harris pressed. Her eyes darted to the mirrored wall where she knew others were watching. "Scared he'd hurt me. He grabbed me, pushed me against the counter. I tried to fight back. Then—" She paused, tears spilling down her cheeks. There was blood. The detective leaned forward. "Did you harm your husband?" Lila shook her head fiercely. "No. I tried to protect myself. He slipped. He fell. And then he was gone. I don't know where he went." Her words trembled, her grief raw on the surface. To an outsider, she might have seemed every bit the victim, a wife driven to desperation by a volatile man. But Harris's trained ears caught the cracks. The timeline shifted each time she retold it. Sometimes Adrian pushed her first. Sometimes she pushed him away. Sometimes the blood came from shattered glass. Other times from a cut she couldn't quite locate. He noted the inconsistencies, his pen scratching against the paper. Later, when they escorted her to a private room for photographs, another detective whispered, "These bruises look fresh, but something's off." "What do you mean?" Harris asked. "They're too clean, almost placed, like someone pressed hard enough to make it look real." Harris filed the thought away. Lila Montgomery was no ordinary housewife caught in tragedy. There was calculation. Behind her tears, back in the room, Lila cradled a cup of tea between trembling hands. "I loved him," she murmured, her gaze distant. "People think we were perfect. But Adrian, he wasn't who they believed. He lied. He hid things. I just wanted the truth." Her words hung in the air, laced with both sorrow and accusation. "Mrs. Montgomery," Harris said carefully, "your neighbors heard a scream before the glass shattered. Was that you?" She nodded. "I screamed because I thought..." He was going to kill me. And yet, Harris countered, when we arrived, you had blood on your hands, but no injuries that could explain it. Adrian was gone. Can you see why that troubles us? Lila's eyes widened, glistening with fresh tears. You think I hurt him? That I wanted this? We just want the truth, he said. The recorder clicked off after hours of circling questions. By the end, Lila was escorted to a holding cell. Not under arrest, but not free either. Her story had gaps too wide to ignore. Outside the glass, Harris conferred with his partner, Detective Monroe. She's playing the victim card hard, but it doesn't all line up. The bruises don't convince me, the timeline's off, and that blood. It didn't look accidental. Monroe crossed her arms. Then there's the missing husband. If he's alive, why hasn't he called? Why hasn't a body turned up? Either he's hiding, or she's hiding something, Harris muttered. Meanwhile, in her cell, Lila sat in the dim light, rehearsing her grief like a role she had no choice but to play. She pressed her palms against her eyes until the tears came, forcing her body to match the story she'd given. Every sob was both real and false, tangled in guilt and survival. But beneath the mask, another truth gnawed at her. She knew far more than she had confessed. Adrian's secrets were only the beginning. And if the detectives dug deeper, they would uncover things neither she nor Adrian ever wanted the world to see. As dawn crept over Crestwood, casting pale light through the station windows, Detective Harris closed the file for the night. This isn't over, he muttered. And he was right, because the story Lila told wasn't just fragile, it was hiding a far darker past waiting to surface. The Montgomery case quickly spread through Crestwood like wildfire. By the time the morning papers hit doorsteps, the headline read, "Perfect husband missing, wife covered in blood." Inside the station, Detective Harris pored over Adrian Montgomery's files. The more he read, the less perfect Adrian seemed. His record was clean, but his life, his finances, his connections was anything but. "Look at this," Harris muttered, sliding a document across the desk to Detective Monroe. Adrian had over $50,000 in credit card debt. Gambling, maybe. A few large withdrawals, cash only. Monroe scanned the papers, her brow furrowing. That's not the picture of a stable husband. And here's more. He had a private P.O. box under his name. Rented 6 months ago. What's he hiding there? The discovery cracked open a door the detectives hadn't realized was waiting. Adrian Montgomery had built his image carefully, but behind it was a man tangled. Secrets. Later that afternoon, Harris and Monroe visited Adrian's office. His secretary, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, seemed reluctant but willing to talk. Mr. Montgomery was charming, she admitted, but distracted lately. He'd leave for hours without saying where he was going. Once I overheard him on the phone. He sounded angry. He said the name Clara. The name sent a jolt through Harris. Clara Whitmore. The secretary nodded slowly. Yes, I thought she might be a client, but the way he said her name, it didn't sound like business. The puzzle pieces clicked together. Lila's suspicions hadn't come from nowhere. Adrian's shadow life had a face. Clara. Back at the station, Monroe dug deeper. Found her. Clara Whitmore, 32, real estate consultant. And get this, she used to live in Crestwood. Moved away 5 years ago, but her address matches one of Adrian's recent hotel receipts. Harris leaned back in his chair, exhaling. So he wasn't just lying to his wife. He was living a double life. Meanwhile, in her holding cell, Lila stared at the pale wall, every tick of the clock gnawing at her nerves. She thought of the scarf, the perfume, the text messages. Her instincts had been right. Adrian hadn't just betrayed her. He had humiliated her, and now, with him missing, she was the one painted as a monster. When Harris entered the room again, she looked up, eyes hollow. "We've been digging," he said, his voice steady. "Did you know your husband was drowning in debt? Did you know about Clara Whitmore?" Lila's lips parted, but no sound came. The name cut through her chest like glass. Harris studied her reaction. "So you did know, or at least you suspected." Her voice cracked. I thought she was just an affair. I didn't know about the debts." Her tears returned, but Harris no longer saw them as pure grief. There was something layered beneath, a blend of betrayal and rage. As night fell, the investigation widened. Detectives traced Adrian's bank records, his phone logs, his hidden P.O. box. Inside it, they found receipts, hotel stays, expensive dinners, even small gifts wrapped in tissue paper. One bore Clara's name on the card. "He wasn't just Gliss," Monroe murmured. "He was planning a life with her." The image of the perfect husband crumbled completely. Adrian Montgomery had been living two lives, one as the devoted husband and polished lawyer, the other as a man chasing thrills, debts, and forbidden love. News spread quickly. Neighbors whispered not of tragedy, but scandal. The Montgomerys, once envied, were now dissected like a crime scene. Lila's grief seemed tainted, her victimhood suspect, and Adrian's halo long gone. But the deeper truth unsettled Harris most. Clara Whitmore wasn't just a passing fling. Records showed she had once lived on the same street as the Montgomerys. She had known them years ago. "She wasn't a stranger in Adrian's life," Harris muttered, flipping through files. "She's been in the background all along." Which begged the question, was Clara simply the other woman, or did she know more about Adrian's disappearance than anyone realized? Lila, pacing the confines of her cell, clung to fragments of memory. The scarf, the scent, the messages. Adrian's lies were no longer whispers in the dark. They were truths resurfaced, ugly and undeniable, and yet one thought echoed louder than all the rest. If Adrian had been hiding so much, what else had she not yet uncovered? The storm of secrets was only beginning to break. The cracks in Adrian's image had been revealed, but now the detectives turned their attention back to Lila. If Adrian had lied, what about the wife who claimed to be the victim? Detective Monroe entered the interrogation room again, her notepad heavy with fresh evidence. Lila sat at the table, her hair tied back now, the rawness of her earlier tears replaced with a quiet, almost rehearsed composure. "We've learned a lot about your husband," Monroe began. "The debts, the affair, the other woman. But there are details in your story that don't add up." Lila's fingers tightened around her glass of water. "I've told you everything. Adrian was distant. He lied. He betrayed me. I'm not the criminal here." Monroe's tone sharpened. "Then explain why your bruises don't match the timeline you gave us. Our medical examiner says they're older than last night. Staged, perhaps?" The words hung like a knife. Lila's lips trembled, but she forced a steady reply. "You think I hurt myself? Do you know how insulting that is? I was attacked. Detective Harris, who had been silent, finally spoke. "We're not saying you staged everything, but someone's lying, Mrs. Montgomery. And right now you're the only one we can question." Lila's mask cracked just slightly. She looked down at her lap, unable to meet their eyes. Outside the room, the whispers of Crestwood grew louder. Neighbors recalled how Lila was always perfectly dressed, perfectly mannered, perfectly poised. But perfection, they realized, was its own kind of performance. The press dubbed her the widow in white after she appeared at Adrian's preliminary vigil in a crisp ivory dress. Cameras caught her expression, sorrowful, yet strangely detached. Reporters murmured about crocodile. Tears, her every gesture dissected. Back in the station, Monroe laid out the mounting inconsistencies. The shattered glass in the Montgomery kitchen bore only Lila's fingerprints. The blood on her hands matched Adrian's, yes, but the spatter patterns suggested she had been standing over him, not fending him off. When confronted, Lila clung to her script. "I heard something. I went downstairs. He was already bleeding when I found him. I tried to help, that's why my hands—" Harris cut her off. "But you told us you screamed after he attacked you. Neighbors say they heard the scream first, then the glass breaking. Which is it, Lila?" Her throat tightened. I was in shock. Memories blur. Trauma or lies blur," Monroe said coldly. For the first time, Lila's eyes hardened. Do you think you know what it's like to love someone so deeply you ignore every red flag? To build your life around a man, only to watch him destroy it with his secrets? The detectives exchanged a glance. Her words rang true with pain, but they were also manipulative, shifting the frame from guilt to heartbreak. As the hours dragged, Lila realized her perfect facade was crumbling. She had always been the admired wife, the flawless hostess, the woman envied by others. Now, every glance, every headline, every whispered word painted her as the villain. Late that night, Harris reviewed the CCTV footage from a nearby gas station. The timestamp placed Lila's car on the road, not at home at the very hour she swore she was asleep in bed. When confronted with it, she faltered. I needed air, she stammered. Adrian and I fought. I drove. That's all. Convenient, Harris said. But the timing fits with Adrian's disappearance, almost too perfectly. The widow's story was unraveling. Each lie was another thread pulled, leaving the detectives closer to exposing the raw truth beneath. And yet, there was still a missing piece. Clara Whitmore's name lingered like smoke, entwined with Adrian's debts, his infidelity, and his vanishing act. Lila's deception might be damning, but Clara's shadow still loomed. As Monroe closed her file for the night, she muttered, "If Adrian lied and Lila lied, maybe Clara holds the key." In her cell, Lila lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her secrets pressed on her chest like stones, heavy and suffocating. She whispered into the darkness, words only she could hear. They'll never know everything. But she was wrong. The past had a way of clawing itself free. Detective Harris had learned one rule in his years of service. The truth was never clean. It was messy, knotted in contradictions, dripping with motives that didn't fit neatly into police reports. The Montgomery case was no exception. By the time the week ended, two things were clear. Adrian Montgomery wasn't the man his neighbors thought he was, and Lila Montgomery wasn't the grieving widow she pretended to be. What remained unclear was who was telling the bigger lie. The answer came on a gray Friday evening. Harris received a call that Adrian had been found, alive. He was discovered in a rundown motel 20 miles outside Crestwood, disoriented but breathing. A bottle of pills sat on the nightstand, half empty, and his wrists bore faint red lines. When paramedics rushed him into the hospital, he muttered one name through dry, cracked lips. Lila. News spread faster than lightning. The missing husband was alive, and suddenly, the widow in white had questions to answer. At the hospital, Harris and Monroe stood outside Adrian's room. Inside, Lila sat in a chair, her face pale, hands trembling. For once, the mask seemed gone. She didn't look like the perfect wife or the manipulative widow. She looked like a woman who had been living inside a nightmare of her own making. When Adrian's eyes flickered open, silence filled the room. Husband and wife stared at each other, bound not by affection but by secrets too heavy to carry alone. "You left me," Lila whispered, her voice raw. "You made me believe you were dead." Adrian's throat tightened. "And his words caught. "You were supposed to stay quiet. You were supposed to protect us." The detectives exchanged a sharp glance. "Protect you from what?" Monroe demanded. Adrian exhaled, his body sinking into the sheets. "From Clara, from the debts, from everything I got tangled in." His voice cracked. Lila knew. She knew more than she let on. Lila's tears slid silently down her cheeks. "I was trying to save us. I wanted to believe we were still the couple everyone thought we were. The perfect couple. I couldn't let the truth ruin us." Harris stepped forward. "So you lied. To us. About the bruises, about the night he disappeared." Lila nodded faintly. "Yes, but I didn't kill him. I didn't have to. Adrian killed himself a long time ago. Just not the way you think." Adrian's jaw clenched, shame etched into his features. "She's right. I lied. I cheated. I gambled until everything we had was gone. Clara wasn't just an affair, she was my escape plan. But even she got tired of cleaning up my mess. And when I found out," Lila said, her voice sharper, "now, I couldn't let it all come crashing down. So I played the role. I staged the bruises. I told the story you'd believe. Because if Adrian looked like a monster, at least I'd still look like a victim. The room fell into suffocating silence. The perfect couple had been nothing more than a house of cards, each lie stacked upon the other until collapse was inevitable. Harris rubbed his temples. So the truth is this. Adrian faked his disappearance to escape his debts. Lila lied to protect the image of her marriage and herself. And Clara, she was caught in the middle. Adrian's gaze lingered on Lila. We destroyed each other, didn't we? Lila let out a hollow laugh, one without joy. We didn't destroy each other, Adrian. We destroyed ourselves. Together. The detectives left them in the room, their voices echoing long after the door shut. What remained was a marriage stripped bare, exposed for what it truly was. Not perfect, not enviable, but poisonous. As night settled, reporters crowded the hospital lawn, their headlines shifting once again. The perfect couple's darkest truth had surfaced, and it wasn't murder or mystery. It was survival, pride, and betrayal entwined so tightly that love had turned into its cruelest form. In the end, Lila and Adrian were two sides of the same lie. Neither fully guilty, neither fully innocent, but both forever chained to the truth they had fought so hard to bury. The confession changed everything. In the hospital room, husband and wife had admitted what few couples would ever dare say aloud. Their marriage was a performance, their love a weapon, and their lies a shared foundation that had rotted long before the police came knocking. But confessions did not erase consequences. By the following week, prosecutors announced formal charges. Adrian Montgomery was indicted for fraud, concealment of assets, and obstruction of justice. His debts had left a trail of ruined clients and unpaid investors, all clamoring for justice. Lila Montgomery, meanwhile, faced her own reckoning. She was charged with obstruction and filing a false police report, staging bruises, misleading detectives, weaving lies that drained resources and manipulated public sympathy. The courtroom was packed the day their arraignment was held. Neighbors, who once toasted the couple's anniversaries, now sat with folded arms, whispering about betrayal. Journalists filled every bench, pens scratching, cameras flashing as the so-called perfect couple finally faced the world, stripped of their perfection. When asked for their pleas, Adrian's voice cracked as he whispered, "Guilty." Lila lifted her chin. Her lawyer advised against it, but she too said, "Guilty." It wasn't courage, it wasn't remorse, it was resignation, the final act of a play they had performed for years. Outside the courthouse, Detective Harris gave a statement. To the press, his words were calm, deliberate. This case is a reminder that appearances deceive. The Montgomerys weren't victims of random violence. They were victims of their own choices. What began as love ended in lies, and what they built together collapsed under the weight of their secrets. The cameras devoured every syllable, but Crestwood didn't need the broadcast. They had already learned their lesson. The Montgomery home, once admired for its manicured lawn and glowing windows, now stood as a hollow shell. Curtains drawn, locks rusting, it became a silent monument to what happens when perfection is forced too far. At sentencing, Adrian was given 5 years, reduced for his attempted cooperation. Lila received 18 months, less time but perhaps a heavier punishment in its own way. For her, freedom would never erase the stain of being the widow in white, a woman whose tears were now forever branded as crocodile. In prison, Adrian was a shadow of himself. The once polished lawyer shuffled through corridors with downcast eyes, haunted by debts he could never repay. Not just financial, but moral. Lila, in her cell miles away, folded her hands and replayed every moment, every lie. She told herself she had loved him once. She told herself she had only wanted to preserve what they had. But the truth gnawed at her. She had loved the performance more than the man. Months later, Clara Whitmore resurfaced briefly, issuing a single statement through her attorney. She denied involvement, denied knowing the extent of Adrian's crimes, and vanished again into obscurity. But her name lingered like an echo in Crestwood, a ghostly reminder of how far Adrian had strayed. The Montgomery story became more than gossip. It became cautionary legend. Parents warned their children, "Don't envy what you don't understand, don't trust the shine of perfection." And yet behind the tragedy, a question remained unanswered. Had Lila known more than she admitted? Had she orchestrated not just lies, but the very collapse of the man she claimed to love? Or had Adrian, in his arrogance, dragged them both into ruin? No verdict could answer that. No sentence could repair what was broken. The final image came months after the trials, when a storm swept through Crestwood. Neighbors swore they saw lightning strike the Montgomery home. By morning, a fire had gutted the house, leaving only blackened beams and charred rubble where the perfect facade once stood. Insurance adjusters called it an accident. Some whispered Lila had arranged it from afar. Others said Adrian, bitter and broken, had confessed to it in prison. But to Crestwood it didn't matter. The house was gone. The illusion was gone. All that remained were ashes. Ashes of a marriage that had once been admired, now reduced to cautionary smoke curling into the night sky. The perfect couple's darkest truth had been revealed, but in the end, truth brought no peace, only ruin.